The dominator of the universe, Sai Itoshi, goes one-on-one against the Demon King, Isagi. And recently, with Isagi officially entering the new Gen's 11 level, it has never been more fitting for us to put him against the one, the only, the most hyped up U20 player, Sai Itoshi, where we are going to look at their stats, abilities and explore their best feats to determine who is the ultimate talented learner. Sai Itoshi, a very professional and a cool-headed player, but also a very egotistical character with a little bit of a brotherly complex. But also, Sai is the most hyped character in all of Blue Lock, being labeled the prodigy of Japan at such a young age, and even being scouted at that young age by the best club in the world, Real, which by the way is just crazy for the best club to just want this random little Japanese player. However, it was for a good reason, as even at a young age, Sai showed not only the talent but also the mentality and the ego necessary. However, before we delve deeper into this, first and as always we gotta start with his physicality, which I gotta say Sai boasts a great well-rounded physicality. And even though this has not been straight up stated in Blue Lock, we can derive this from the fact that narratively speaking he has a similar physicality to his brother, albeit I think Rin is slightly stronger. And the confirmation for this is that in the U20 game we saw how they were evenly matched physically speaking. It honestly was as if we were seeing the same player, albeit Sai is lefty and Rin is righty. In a sense, they quite literally mirror each other, especially in their well-roundedness. However, for us, this well-rounded physicality means, even though Sai might not straight up dominate any area, he still has great raw power and strength, great jumping ability, great speed, and of course, astonishing endurance. However, and even though this is very impressive, where Sai really shines is with his abilities and weapons. And so, ladies and gentlemen, let's take a deeper dive into Sai's abilities and weapons. Now, I'd like to start this section with actually stating that Sai is the perfect midfielder, and this is more important than just making him the greatest midfielder in the U20 category. It actually extends to a very crucial point that will actually play a huge role in determining the winner of this matchup. As you see, most of Sai's abilities and weapons serve the purpose of delivering perfect passes to the front line. Even that cool-headedness and that insane mentality that he had is actually very crucial to a midfielder so he can read the field better. However, I feel if we are going to talk about a midfielder, it's only fitting that we start with his passing ability, as it is pretty much the most prerequisite ability for an attacking midfielder. And in all honesty, Sai might have the most oppressive passing ability in the entirety of the show, being only rivaled by Charles. And what's interesting about this, even before we explore what this passing ability is all about, we can see that even at a young age, Sai had an inclination for actually passing the ball, especially to his brother Rin. And this actually leads back to the first point I made regarding Sai being the perfect midfielder, as much like Hiyori, his natural inclination and his calm demeanor naturally lead towards him being a midfielder. However, and going back to his passing ability, Sai probably has the most accurate passing ability in the entirety of Blue Lock, which honestly is just a bold statement. Think about it this way, in a show about strikers, you know we must have a plethora of midfielders that deliver the ball to said strikers. And among all of them, Sai reigns on the throne of passing accuracy with terror, with again Charles being the only one close to him. And even still, feats-wise, when it comes to accuracy, I still think Sai is untouched. And of course, the biggest example of this is his pass to Shidous in the U20 game. And I'm talking specifically about the Dragon Drive goal, as he actually gave Shidous a perfectly placed pass that was within Shidous' wildest imaginations. But at the same time, it was 2 centimeters away from Jigiri, who sprinted at full speed at the ball. Which, if you think about it, this level of accuracy is rather scary, and really is comparable to the Predator eyes when it comes to shooting, which unironically leads us to theorize about Sai presenting a type of vision that actually enables him to reach such level. In fact, this vision is the counterpart to the Predator eyes. It's just like them, but instead of helping in scoring, it actually helps in passing the ball through to the striker. However, before I get ahead of myself, and before we talk about this speculative ocular ability, we gotta carry on with Sai's passing ability. As you see, accurate is not all there is to his passes. And in all honesty, probably one of the best aspects to his passing ability is actually something that we did not understood well in the U20 game. And only after the Neo Egoist League that I can say that Sai's ability to deliver those perfect and very striker-tailored passes is actually one of his greatest weapons. You see, Sai doesn't just deliver the ball to the perfect position for any striker, but also he takes the specs, abilities, weapons, and even weaknesses of said striker into account, resulting in such passes that honestly feel so right for the situation and for the playing style of the striker that it instantly puts the forward player into a state of ease and ecstasy, something that not many midfielders can replicate, with Ness and probably Charles being the only two who can do this. However, again, they do not do it to the level that Sai was doing it. And I am saying this because Sai showed the ability to do this with a plethora of strikers, ranging from insane players like Shidous to actual dog shit like Sendo and the U20 forward line. Unlike for example Ness, who've been playing with Kaiser for a long time, or Charles, who at least played with Shidous for like 3 games, Sai was able to do this instantly with strikers he never played with before. And as I said, not only did he not play with them at all, they were actually so shit it really was painful. Yet Sai was able to meet their ideal play and was actually able to push them forward with his passes, something that actually we did not understand the scope of at the U20 game. You see, at the end of the PXG game, Ness's answer to Kaiser ditching him and playing with Isagi was not just a good response, but actually the perfect response. Instead of just giving his tailored and very delicate passes, Ness actually threw everything out the window and delivered an insanely hard, but also very possible pass to Kaiser, with the hopes that he would push Kaiser towards a new awakening. And this actually took everything out of Ness. And here's the crazy part, we've seen Sai do this constantly, repeatedly, and so effortlessly. He did it with Sendo twice, however he failed. Then, and most importantly, he did it with Shidous, to the point he brought such a high level from Shidous that he himself was shocked by that. And I know this might not seem as a huge weapon, but think about it this way. First, we have Sai's ability to perfectly understand the striker he plays with. Couple this with his ability to push said striker to reach new heights, and you will get a midfielder that will not constantly perform well, but also constantly push the team upwards, constantly causing the strikers to rise to a new level, which at the end of the PXG game, it turns out to be all that the pros think about, specifically Loki and Noah. And while Noah does it through rivalry, Loki's answer was actually a great midfielder that would push him towards being number 1. And as much as I love Charles, as much how great he is in this point, he just does not hold a candle to Sai in this regard. And honestly, we did not understand this as well in the U20 game. In fact, I only understood it that well after just how insane Ness became when he acquired this weapon. And the fact that Sai was doing it this effortlessly really puts into perspective how great and how far he is from the competition. And honestly, the only reason Charles is able to keep up with him is actually due to the next weapon I want to talk about, which is his passing versatility and path trajectory. You see, with the exception of Charles, Sai has shown the most versatility when it comes to passing. He has shown us the most variety in the way he delivers his passes. And what I mean here is actually the way he controls, twists, and modify how he delivers his passes depending on the situation. And I mean, this kind of feels as a prerequisite to his playing style, as part of just being able to understand every striker is actually to match every situation with a different pass. And I truly believe Sai might be the best at this. However, feats wise, as I said, Charles definitely beats Sai here. But, and speaking of Charles, I actually want to go back to the speculative ocular ability, because the one who inspired it is none other than the French imp. You see, in his first insane showing, we knew Charles has metavision, yet when the time came to deliver his insane pass to Shidous, he actually showed a different pattern to metavision, something that only Isagi had the privilege to. Not even Snuffy or Cavassos have different patterns, and so this really raised an eyebrow in our brains. However, later it got confirmed that he also has the regular metavision pattern, and so what Charles showed there is actually a different type of vision. Much like how Kaiser uses both metavision and the Predator eyes, Charles also uses metavision, but also this new eye ability, which we are calling the sniper eyes. And from what the community deducted, these eyes, much like the name suggests, enable the midfielder to snipe the best trajectory, to snipe the best passing course towards any striker he sets his sights on. And once we've seen and understood this from Charles, it actually became clear how Sai was able to attain insanely high accuracy levels. You see, with the sniper eyes, it becomes very clear how Sai was able to jungle between different strikers, between different playing styles, and between different situations with no issue. But also at the same time, each and every pass of his was slightly outside of every blocker reach, to the point only Nico and Rin were able to match him on 2 different occasions, and all of this because of his sniper eyes that allow him to pinpoint the perfect trajectory that is not only safe from the enemy team, but at the same time perfect for any striker that will be receiving the ball. And in all honesty, this ocular ability just wraps his passing ability neatly and perfectly. However, and if you could believe it, it's not the only ocular ability that Sai has. As you see, to be the perfect midfielder, one simply cannot rely on his passing ability. I mean, the biggest example of this would be Ness. Despite having insane passes and a great dribbling ability, he pretty much lacks in other areas. Specifically, I'm talking about perception and the ability to place yourself in perfect spots. And here again, much like Charles, Sai shines insanely, as in the U20 game he simply was beyond the comprehension of the blue lockers. He always seemed at the perfect position and he always seemed to be everywhere. And because Sai is a talented learner, you already know that this is not instinctive from him, but actually there is a very strong yet tangible weapon behind all of this. Of course, I'm talking about Metavision, which in the Manshine City game was confirmed that Sai had it from Isagi. You see, in that game, after attaining a new level, after Isagi reached a new higher dimension, only then he was able to comprehend Sai's plays. And while Isagi did not specifically state how insane his Metavision is, the fact of the matter remains that Sai has one of the most, if not the most broken ocular ability in the show. And we've seen that the most insane talented learners in the show actually all has a level to Metavision. From the pros like Snuffy and Cavazos to the most dominant U20 players like Isagi, Karasu, Hiyori, Kaiser and Aiku. And despite us not actually knowing where he stands, we can actually at least assume he is on Isagi and Aiku's level in the Ubers game, because he showed the ability to perfectly position himself on the field, much like how Isagi and Aiku were in that game, which I know in the PXG game we reach new heights to Metavision. However, and unfortunately, despite me taking potential into this, we simply do not know where Sai's Metavision stands beyond what he's shown us in the U20 game. Speaking of which, in that game, not only did Sai show the ability to perfectly position himself, but also he showed the ability to play with no intervals, meaning that Sai was already on the next move by the time you are reacting to his first move, something that even speedsters like Chigiri and Yuki were not even able to comprehend. And as I said, he was only matched twice by Rin and Nico where they subconsciously awakened Metavision. But also, and the reason why I placed Metavision on Isagi's level when he was against Ubers is actually his reflex times reflex he did with Shidous. Despite it not being quite literally what Hiyori and Isagi did and what Charles and Shidous were able to do later on, Sai was simply playing with no intervals due to his Metavision and Shidous was matching him due to his instincts. And as I said, it's not quite what Hiyori and Isagi did, but it is actually very close. And because we know Sai did not give his 100% in that game, we can confidently assume that he is at least on that level that was shown by Hiyori and Isagi. However, what we actually know for sure is that Sai's perception, his ability to play with no intervals and position himself perfectly, are not all there is to his positioning. You see, I feel one of the best qualities to a midfielder is actually his ability to free himself with the ball, so he can actually deliver a pass. However, I feel for just how crazy Sai's passes are, an equally insane and a broken dribbling ability is pretty much a prerequisite. And I mean, with the sniper eyes, it is not that necessary, as we've seen with Charles. However, as I said, Sai is just next level, as he has one of the most broken dribbling abilities we've seen in the show. That is, contrary to other active dribbling styles like Lorenzo and Bachira's, is rather reactive, which means that Sai does not exert moves that come from his genius, but instead, much like any talented learner, he exerts moves that actually are reactive to his opponents, which ironically makes his dribbling weirder to deal with for the defenders. You see, unlike active dribbling abilities like Yuki's, one can simply constantly counter them by knowing the rhythm and the tempo to the dribbles, because Sai's tempo is constantly changing depending on who is he against. And so I know it might not be as creative as active dribbling, it is honestly just broken, and I even can say it is even harder to deal with. Case in point is Hiyori. By simply reacting to his opponent through changing his tempo, he actually can always find some freedom to deliver one of his perfect passes. And Sai actually takes this to the extreme with insane outwardly moves. However, and to finish Sai's section, I feel the thing that we need to talk about last is actually his mentality. In the Uber's PXG and Menshine vs Parsha game, we learned through Ego, Noah and Snuffy that mentality is probably the most important quality to any player. Without the right mentality, talent could really goes into waste. Of course, I'm talking about Nagi and somewhat about Ren, and on the other aisle stands Baro, Kaiser and Isagi, all players that showed that mentality is key in order to succeed in this high level. However, I actually want to talk about two other players, which are Ness and Ryo. You see when faced in changes in their perfect striker, Ness and Ryo's answers to helping their strikers were completely different. While Ryo catered to Nagi and helped in killing him off, Ness on the other hand chose to actually rise and challenge Kaiser, something that actually ended up pushing both Kaiser and Isagi, which means the mentality of the midfielder is kinda different than the strikers, because the midfielder is better off pushing the striker to a new height so he himself can reach new heights. And I truly believe when it comes to this specifically, this midfielder mentality, there isn't, and I mean it, there isn't someone close to Hiyori and Sai. In fact, both show such a huge ego and at the same time such a drive to push their strikers to reach new heights, it's honestly crazy. And if you couple this insane mentality with Sai's just cosmic level plays, it honestly results in a very scary player. And honestly, if I didn't know any better, I would say Sai is the true final boss of Japan. Well, that's the aim of today's video, because in order to be the final boss of Japan, Sai must first defeat the Demon King. And so, can Sai actually beat the new Isagi? Isagi Yoichi, the Mahoraga of Blue Lock, and the protagonist of our story. A player who I did not think I would be making a video on him against Sai of all people this soon. Yet here we are. Much like blocks in Tetris, Isagi has built his playing style brick by brick and ability by ability. However, before we jump the gun and talk about his abilities, first and again we gotta start with his physical stats. Now, it shouldn't be a surprise to anyone when I say that Isagi is the definition of average when it comes to his physicality, with the exception of course being his insane endurance, which as you will see when we get to his abilities, it is a pretty much prerequisite. However, in terms of strength, speed and jumping ability, Isagi is nothing but average. Now, I gotta say that Isagi is not low by any means, he's just average. However, despite this, despite being Mr. Joe, we've seen him in his last goal beat both Shidous and Kaiser to the ball despite them being much faster than him. And this is where Isagi shines. Even though his physicality is average, he was able to beat them despite the speed advantage that Shidous and Kaiser have. And that's all due to his abilities. And so, ladies and gentlemen, it's time we talk about his weapons. Now, I'm not really going to beat around the bush. I am actually going to start straight up with his biggest and most powerful weapon. The weapon that actually puts together his whole playing style. As I said, Isagi has always built himself brick by brick and has always added weapons on top of each other in order to build himself. However, and despite what you might think, this in of itself is actually an ability of his. In fact, it is the strongest ability he has. Not only that, I rank it as number 2 as the most busted weapon in all of Blue Lock, second only to Ryo's chameleon style, which if you think about it, for someone that we call an average Joe, for someone that we call not a genius, he is actually pretty busted if he has the second strongest weapon ever. And so what is this ability I keep hyping up? Of course, I'm talking about his adaptability. I mean, Isagi is being called the genius of adaptability or an adaptability demon for a reason. That's because no matter the setting, no matter his opponents, no matter his allies, Isagi is constantly improving himself and constantly acquiring small weapons that at first glance might not seem that impressive. However, with his ability to put them all together, they result in one of the most menacing and one of the hardest players to deal with on the field. And if you think about it, this means that Isagi will constantly and will forever be improving. As long as he can play, he will able to devour allies and enemies alike. He will be able to morph and rise to every challenge he faces. And if I am not making it clear, if I am not setting it to be as dangerous as it should be, just know that this adaptability of his will allow him to catch up to almost everyone, given enough time. I mean, hell, we've seen him trying to adapt to the Masters, and while he failed against Nuffy and Levi, he actually was somewhat successful against Prince and Loki. And if you think about it, this by definition means that Isagi is somewhat unbeatable, as given enough time, he will be able to catch up and then surpass everyone. And so, in a sense, this weapon is what's going to allow the story of Blue Lock to continue. This is the weapon that will lead Isagi to being the best striker in the world in the future. However, and as you might have guessed, this adaptability will be useless if he doesn't constantly acquire worthy weapons. Even if they seem very weak on their own, Isagi is capable of putting them together in order to better himself. And so it's actually time for us to talk about these weapons. Or that's what I would say, because I actually want to talk about his mentality first. You see, as I stated, because Isagi's adaptability is second only to Ryo's, one might think that Ryo will forever be better than Isagi. Because they are both talented learners and Ryo's weapon is superior to Isagi's adaptability, that's the most logical conclusion, right? Well, no. And that's actually entirely due to the mentalities of the two. You see, despite having what I deem the strongest weapon in all of Blue Lock, Ryo is constantly shooting himself in the foot, especially with regard to Nagi, and this is where Isagi shines specifically, because, and I am not joking here, I deem Isagi to have the best mentality in all of the U20 category. He is the first without a doubt, sharing it with Baro, and this is not my opinion or the way I look at it. In fact, we know this from Noah and Snuffy's comments on them. It wasn't the weapons or the plays that impressed the pros, it was actually the mentality of Baro and Isagi that really captivated Noah and Snuffy. And as you all know, to me this is one of the biggest feats of Isagi, to be able to impress specifically Snuffy that much. And so, what is this mentality of his? You see, on surface level, Isagi might seem unassuming, especially due to his calm and friendly demeanor outside of the games. However, when the time comes to play football, there isn't a more focused, there isn't a more dedicated player than Isagi. Not only that, but Isagi is constantly seeking for the next weapon. As you see, despite him scoring the opening of the PXG game, he was still constantly trying to beat Kaiser and Rin to the next goal. And this undying fire inside of him, when coupled with his insane adaptability, resulting in a player that will never be satisfied until he is number one. And even still, I really doubt that he will be satisfied once he reached the top spot. However, and if you could believe it, at the end of the PXG game, his mentality actually matured even further, where Isagi ushered a new era to his playing style. After Rin awakened and Loki and Noah joined the battle, Isagi found himself at the wall of evolution, where because he is a talented learner, he was not able to compete with geniuses that were having insane impulses to score and insane impulses to dominate. Isagi simply could not compete. However, because he is the adaptability demon, and with a little bit of help from Kaiser, he actually found a formula to bringing down the geniuses. You see, no matter how you think about it, a football match is an 11-player versus an 11-player competition. And so if geniuses are able to create anomalies all on their own, the only way a talented learner could fight is actually by manipulating and controlling the field in a collective. Something that we've seen Snuffy do in order to completely dominate Noah, and then we've seen Isagi and Kaiser do in order to completely dominate Rin, despite Rin being the most dominant striker we've seen in the U20 category. And this new mentality of his, if you think about it, was actually born out of his adaptability, and it kinda makes his adaptability weapon even scarier, because it doesn't just work on weapons and abilities or even tactics, it even works on mental state and ideas, which means to the content of Noah, Isagi will never have a mental block, because he will always be adapting. However, enough about his mentality and his adaptability, because I honestly could extend this video to the heat death of the universe. Let's actually talk about the individual weapons. Now, as I said, most of these weapons are actually not that impressive on their own, and they actually shine in tandem with other little weapons. However, there is one piece, there is one ability that breaks this mold completely. Isagi's second best ability, which is of course Metavision. Ever since he was a kid, Isagi had an insane spatial awareness. He always had an innate ability to know everything that is happening in his surroundings. Not only that, but this actually helped him a lot in his football career. As Isagi likes to put it, he can smell the most dangerous spots on the field, and then he can act accordingly. However, this insane spatial awareness and perception of his actually reached a new level once he unlocked Metavision. By actually observing Kaiser play, Isagi was able to all on his own acquire Metavision, something that only he and Ryo can boast about, which again is all due to the two strongest weapon in Blue Lock. Isagi adapted to Kaiser, and Ryo without knowing it copied from Sai, Isagi and Kaiser after witnessing them play with Metavision. Metavision honestly is just like adaptability. It is so broken, but also it helps with other weapons. You see, one of the most important things that became clear in the Neo Egoist League is actually the fact that being able to position yourself perfectly is the key in order to succeed in this high level. Even players who can engage the defenders physically like Ren still positions himself perfectly to receive the ball. And there is no doubt about it, there isn't a weapon in the entirety of Blue Lock that actually helps in perfect positioning like Metavision does, and I could only see the impulses of a genius, the only weapon that could rival Metavision in this regard. However, that's not all to Metavision. You see, because you are constantly scanning the field and you are constantly witnessing what is happening around you, it actually allows the player to play with no intervals at all. As soon as you receive the ball, you are able to pass it because you already know where your target is. And this actually will lead us to talk about a broken weapon later on. However, for now, just know that it makes the player very slippery and hard to deal with, because as soon as he gets the ball, he is already on the move. Well, in the case of Isagi, it's actually even scarier with the fastest piece. However, before we talk about this weapon specifically, first I want to talk about a weapon that actually gives birth to the fastest piece. Of course, I'm talking about egocentrism, and it's when the player takes into account the motives of his allies and enemies, making him truly understand what is going on the field. And if you think about it, if Metavision allows you to see everything around you, egocentrism allows you to understand everyone around you, which means your judgment becomes insanely better. By understanding your opponents and your allies, you are able to move more efficiently. In a sense, you are able to swim with the current, not against it. As I said in the Manshai City game, just by understanding Kaiser and Yuki, he was able to beat both in that last play. And this leads us straight to the fastest piece, which states that Isagi does not just look at everything through Metavision and understand everything through egocentrism, because that was not enough. What actually needs to happen is that Isagi needs to look at everything, understand everything, and then from what he understood, move faster than anyone. And just to put into perspective how broken this is, up until this point, there was no one who could beat Shidous in terms of reaction time. There was simply no way for anyone with a brain to beat Shidous who just reacts through his instincts. However, by analyzing the field prior and actually understanding what's about to happen, Isagi actually moves before the play even happens, beating even Shidous, which is just mind-boggling. I mean, reaction can never beat actually predicting the future. And I know Isagi can't do it with 100% accuracy, since there is no telling what's going to happen in the future. It actually gives him a huge edge when the opportunity is right, as again we've seen him predict what Ness was going to do faster than anyone, as we saw him move before even Ness passed the ball. Something that not even Shidous was able to do, which by the way Shidous was second right behind him because he reacted through his instincts. And honestly, this whole thing, this whole chain reaction thing, adaptability, then scanning the field with Metavision, understanding everyone with egocentrism, adapting to everyone faster than anyone, actually results in Isagi completely nullifying his speed weakness, simply because he will move before anyone has the idea of moving. And if you remember, this is exactly how Snuffy played. I mean, as soon as Kaiser and Isagi went to stop Baro, Snuffy was already in the move and positioned himself in a place where he would take the ball. Something that seemed outwardly to Isagi, he is now doing it. And I know it is to a lesser extent than Snuffy, but still this is the right path towards the pros. And honestly, it just makes Isagi very scary. Speaking of reacting before anyone can think of reacting, next let's talk about his reflex times reflex weapon. Much like Sai's performance with Shidous, Isagi was able to achieve the same thing with Hiyori at the end of the Uber's game. However, instead of one of them only having Metavision and the other reacting through his instincts, both Hiyori and Isagi aim for the empty spot left by the defense and target it without any contact, because they both understand the most optimal play. But hold on a second. Shidous' weapon is not just to react instinctively, but rather it is also his ability to shake off any defender through his footwork. And this is where Isagi's adaptability shines once more, as probably the first weapon Isagi ever devoured is this weapon specifically that he took from Naruhaya. By observing how Naruhaya watches the eyes of the defender before making his move, Isagi learned to do the same thing, by taking the attention off of him and then cutting to the other side of the defender, completely shaking him off, which by the way made Isagi so slippery it's honestly so hard to man-mark him, something that we only saw Rin capable of doing so. I mean, if one of the best duelists is required to stop Isagi one-on-one, then you can already tell how broken this off-the-ball movement weapon is. And mind you, due to his adaptability and the fastest piece, Isagi still was able to shake Rin off. However, with this, we actually reached the final weapon Isagi has, which is of course his direct shot, an ability that I've always said it wraps his weapons nicely. You see, Isagi's whole playing style is to get himself free in order for him to have a 100% scoring chance, which is crazy by the way. However, one of the things that is a prerequisite to a playing style like this is actually a direct shot. In the case with Isagi's direct shot, it's actually not as broken as the Kaiser impact. And also, he doesn't have the agility to do some crazy stunts like Shidous in mid-air. However, the thing with Isagi's shot is actually the most versatile of the three. It might not be the strongest, but it is the most versatile. And why is that? Well, again, we gotta talk about his adaptability. Once Isagi noticed that the defenders are very wary of his direct shot with his righty foot, he was able to train his left foot to do a good enough shot in order for Isagi to give himself more options, as this way he can shoot from his right or left side. And we know with his left side he needs to be closer to the goal and it's not as powerful and accurate, but because of his ability to get himself free, it actually is more than enough to finish the job. However, that's not all. You see, through adapting to Nagi, he was able to devour his two-gun volley, where he fakes with one leg and shoots with the other. And because Isagi can shoot with both, this actually becomes insanely versatile. You see, depending on the situation, Isagi could shoot with his right leg or feint with it, and he can do the same with his left leg, making him very dangerous once he slips in, as usually one defender is not enough to stop him. And honestly, as I said, this shooting ability of his is just the perfect spearhead to his playing style. And while as I said it's not as broken as Barrow's, Rin's or Kaiser's, it still fits perfectly with his weapons and works as the ultimate weapon to finish the job. And overall, I'd say Isagi in the Neo Egoist League really became a beast and really reached the new Gen 11 level. However, can he beat the dominator of the universe, Sai Itoshi? For how this matchup would go, it's honestly one of the craziest versus videos I've made on my channel, and this is entirely due to Sai. You see, the Sai we've seen in the U20 game definitely loses to Isagi, there is just no doubt about it. However, much like I've done in his matchup with Rin, I will be taking Sai's full potential here. As you have seen when I spoke of Sai earlier, I really took into consideration his potential weapons and the level of those weapons, and so this matchup is all about full potential Sai versus Isagi at the end of the Neo Egoist League. And honestly, it is really hard to tell. You see, both are so dominant at their positions, it's honestly not funny. Sai dominates the midfield with terror, and Isagi dominates the front line with terror. However, and speaking of the front line, I think the key for us understanding who is better in today's video is going to be none other than Michael Kaiser. You see, I always say that Kaiser and Isagi became the same level at the end of the Neo Egoist League. They both awakened in the PXG game, and they both attained new mentality that will propel them to the pros level. However, I always say Isagi is slightly better because in the last play, Kaiser simply did not have the mental fortitude to account for Ness. And where am I going with this? Well, as you all know, the Kaiser we saw in the PXG game is actually the true Kaiser. The one we've seen in the previous 3 games is actually a satisfied Kaiser, something that I don't really need to explain why it is this bad. You see, that Kaiser thought that he achieved the top spot, and so he really became playful. We've seen him, he scores a goal, then he starts taunting Isagi, he is playful, he's not serious. However, in the PXG game, he reverted back to 0, which means he reverted back to the Kaiser that actually became became the new Gen 11 Kaiser, which is where Sai ties in, because we can say with confidence, since he is the new Gen 11 as well, he is on the same level as the Kaiser of the PXG game, which unironically puts him on the same level as Isagi right now. And if this is the case, if they are both dominant in their positions, and if they are both on the same level, only one criteria is fitting to determine the better player. Of course, I'm talking about mentality. And here's the kicker, in terms of mentality, they are both the best. Isagi has the best striker mentality, and Sai has the best midfielder mentality. However, there is a catch to all of this. You see, Isagi attained this mentality very recently. He only did it at the end of the PXG game. In fact, as of now, not even a day has passed. However, on the other hand, Sai had this mentality ever since he went to Spain, ever since he gave up on being a striker and decided to be a midfielder. And I know this means that, by definition, his ego is weaker than Isagi's. However, in terms of mentality specifically, Sai has been a professional for like 3 to 4 years now. And that's definitely crazy. And as I said with Kaiser, just him reverting back to his zero mentality really improved him insanely. And so for that reason, and because we can theorize that Sai's mentality is more mature than Isagi's, I am leaning towards giving it to Sai. However, there is one point I'd like to talk about, which is regarding to Rin. You see, Rin actually beat Sai at the end of the U20 game, and in the PXG game, both Isagi and Rin actually beat his Phantom. However, this does not mean that Isagi and Rin are better than Sai overall. You see, Rin beat Sai one-on-one, which kinda is unfair because Rin is a genius and Sai is a talented learner. When we look at the overall assessment, Sai was still the most dominant force in that game. And Rin's vision here is actually out of trauma and not really determining of Sai's level. And there is another point, and it takes us back to Sai actually forfeiting being a striker. You see, in the realm of Blue Lock, Sai is actually playing at the highest of levels. He is playing in the best club in the world. And judging by the way Real wants to take Rin and Kaiser, you could already tell that the most fierce competition in the entirety of Blue Lock is actually in Real. And as we've seen in the Neo Egoist League, competition is what gives birth to really strong players. And because of this, I honestly believe Sai is slightly better than Kaiser and Isagi, simply because he is performing very well and he is dominating in the best club in the world. And I know in the U20 category, but you get the point. And from this and the mentality point, I think I am giving it to Sai. If it wasn't for Isagi's adaptability, you see, if we say they are very close to each other, then by definition, if they just face each other once or twice, Isagi could adapt and beat Sai. But this is not happening anytime soon. And so, as it stands right now, I truly believe Sai is slightly better than Isagi. And so he is the winner of today's video and the one walking with the W. But that's all I've got for you today, guys. I really hope you enjoyed the video, and until next time, thank you for watching.